Okay, think about this for a second. It's kind of wild, right? A little over 100 years ago, people saw a flickering black and white movie of a train and literally ran out of the theater screaming. Now, we're streaming 4K blockbusters on our phones without even blinking. So, how on earth did we get from there to here? Well, that's exactly the incredible journey we're going to break down. So, here it is, the evolution of film, how cinema learns to talk. And hey, when we say talk, we're not just talking about when sound finally came along. Nope. We're diving deep into the visual language of film. You know, that unspoken grammar, the shots, the edits, the whole storytelling playbook that filmmakers built from the ground up to tell stories that were more and more complex and way more emotional.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with cinema's magical birth. Then, we'll see how Hollywood built all the rules. After that, we get to the fun part, the great rule breakers. From there, we'll jump into Hollywood's gritty reboot, and we'll finish up with where we are today, an age where everything is a remix.
Okay, let's kick things off with part one, cinema's magical birth. I mean, you gotta go way back, right? Before there was anything like film, there was this deep, ancient human desire to see images move, to just capture a shadow and somehow magically bring it to life. And look, this whole thing didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was a super slow burn, an evolution. For centuries, people were chasing this dream. You had the magic lantern back in the 17th century, projecting these cool glass slides. Then 100 years later, you get these crazy phantasmagoria shows using smoke and mirrors to make ghosts appear. And by the 1800s, you've got toys like the zoetrope, creating these little illusions of motion. The desire was absolutely there. The world was just waiting for the tech to catch up.
And then, boom, the breakthrough, the Lumiere Brothers cinematograph in 1895. But here's the thing, the real magic wasn't just the gadget itself, this thing that could record and project. The real magic was the experience it created. I mean, for the very first time, you had total strangers buying a ticket, sitting down together in a dark room, and all watching the same thing. That shared public experience, that's what really gave birth to cinema as we know.
All right, so from this cool little novelty in Paris, the entire center of the film universe packed its bags and moved to a sunny spot in California, Hollywood. And this is where things get really interesting, because filmmaking went from being this magical little spectacle to a massive, powerful, industrial machine.
This period, classical Hollywood, was basically run by a few huge studios, and they really did operate like factories, churning out movies on an assembly line. The producer was the king, not the director. And the main goal, let's be honest, it wasn't always about high art. It was about making a product that was clear, easy to understand, and, most importantly, profitable. It had to have a strong moral compass, too, thanks to this thing called the Hays Code, which was basically the industry's self-censorship rulebook. And to make sure that assembly line worked, they had to invent a whole visual language. It's like a grammar for movies that we all understand now without even thinking about it. Here's the basic recipe. You start with a long shot to establish the scene, to show us where we are. Then you move into a medium shot for the characters to talk and interact. And then when you want to hit them with the feels, you go in for the close. And you have to understand, the close-up was an absolute game changer. I mean, at first, audiences thought it was just bizarre, this giant floating head on screen. It was super unsettling, but filmmakers caught on fast. They realized it was their most powerful weapon. It created this incredible intimacy, this empathy, turning the screen into a true space of emotions. It was like getting a direct window into a character's inner world.
The other big tool in that Hollywood factory, genre. Westerns, musicals, crime flicks. These weren't just labels, they were strict formulas. And they worked on a really simple but brilliant principle, repetition and variation. You give the audience what they already know and love. They know what to expect from a Western, and that's comforting. But then you add just enough of a little twist, a little variation, to keep it interesting. It was the perfect system for pumping out movies.
But, rules are made to be broken, right? After World War II, the world was a completely different place. And suddenly, those clean, morally simple stories from Hollywood just didn't feel real anymore. They felt kind of irrelevant. And over in Europe, a whole new generation of filmmakers was thinking, yeah, it's time to tear up that rulebook. And you can see the shift so clearly when you put Hollywood side by side with what was happening in Italy after the war. This movement, Italian neorealism, was a total rejection of the Hollywood way. So, instead of famous, polished actors, they just cast regular people they found on the street.
Instead of perfect studio sets, they shot on location in the actual bombed-out ruins of their cities. The stories were messy, the endings were often downers, there were no easy answers here.
And then came the French New Wave. Now, if the Italians started a visual revolution, the French started a narrative one. The wild thing is, these guys were all film critics first. They were total movie nerds who had spent years studying and writing about Hollywood's rules. So they knew that grammar inside and out, which meant they knew exactly how to break it in the most interesting ways. They'd use stuff like jarring jump cuts and really complex, ambiguous stories to mess with the audience, to make you pay attention.
So all this revolutionary stuff happening in Europe, well, it absolutely sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. A whole new generation of American directors, guys who grew up watching the old Hollywood classics and these new, edgy European films, they got inspired. They decided it was time to create a new kind of American movie, one that actually reflected the crazy, turbulent times they were living through. And man, were they turbulent times. This was not the sunny, optimistic America of the old Hollywood movies. This was the era of the Vietnam War, the first war people were watching on their TVs every single night. You had political assassinations, the civil rights movement was in full force. There was this huge gap between the generations. The old-fashioned heroes and the simple good versus evil stories, they just didn't make sense anymore. And so, to fit this new world, a new kind of protagonist had to be born, the anti-hero. We're not talking about your classic, clean-cut John Wayne type anymore. No way. These new heroes were complicated, they were flawed, they were morally ambiguous, and they were usually fighting against society, not for it. They perfectly reflected the confusion and the cynicism of the time. And this new anti-hero really came in two main flavors. On one side, you had what you could call the weak hero. This is just an ordinary, kind of incapable person who gets thrown into a totally insane situation. Think Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon. And on the other side, you had the hero of evil. This is that super charismatic but really dark criminal character that you just can't look away from. The perfect example being Don Corleone in The Godfather. And that brings us to the final chapter, right here, right now. After all those decades of building the rules, then tearing them all down, and then putting the pieces back together, we've landed in an era where the entire history of cinema is basically one giant toy box for filmmakers to play with. Yeah, you can think of postmodern cinema as being like a game. It's working on the assumption that you, the audience, have seen a ton of movies, so it's constantly winking at you, giving you these little nods. It mixes up genres and styles, it's packed with quotes and little tributes to older films. The key thing is, it treats all of film history like a language we all speak. Every movie is basically having a conversation with all the movies that came before it.
And his whole remix culture has given us a completely new vocabulary for telling stories, right? It's not just about one-off movies anymore. Now we've got sequels to continue the story, prequels to tell us what happened before, reboots to start the whole thing over for a new generation, spin-offs to follow a side character, and crossovers, where they just smash two different worlds together.
And the genres themselves are getting thrown into a blender. Think about it. Alien isn't just a sci-fi movie. It's basically a horror movie, a haunted house story that just happens to be on a spaceship. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet is a classic romance, sure, but it looks and feels like a modern gangster movie. And then there's Pulp Fiction, which takes a classic crime story, chops it into pieces, and shuffles them all around. Those old, neat genre boxes, they're totally gone. And now, on top of all that, you throw in digital technology. I mean, think about motion capture. You can take an actor's performance and turn them into literally any creature you can imagine. The line between what's real and what's computer-generated has never been more blurred. We've gone from just capturing a shadow on a wall to building entire photorealistic worlds from nothing. It makes you constantly second-guess what you're even looking at. Which kind of brings us to one last big, and I think pretty interesting question. After more than 100 years of building this language, breaking it, and remixing all the pieces, what does original even mean anymore? In an age of infinite sequels and reboots, where every story is talking to the stories that came before, where does something truly new come from? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you hit play.